Ah, it's you again. Welcome back to the Black Quill. Come in, make yourself comfortable. Perhaps a cup of tea, a strong coffee, or even a glass of wine is in order. Go ahead, I'll wait. Once you're settled, draw your blanket a little tighter and dim the lights. Because tonight, we delve into the shadows where nightmares are born, and whispered stories come alive. Are you ready? Good. Let us begin. Tonight's story, The House That Screamed. The house had no business existing. Evelyn stared at it from the edge of the warped forest, her breath curling in the sharp October air. Its silhouette loomed unnaturally tall, its spires bent as though leaning to whisper terrible secrets to the wind. Black roots twisted up the foundation, gnawing at the stone like hungry fingers. The flames that licked at its towers gave no heat, only an eerie, flickering light that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. She had come for Lily. Her sister had disappeared a week ago near here. The townsfolk warned her not to, warned her of the scream. The house calls to those who carry a burden, one had whispered, their eyes darting toward the cursed woods. It feeds on what you carry, and it never lets go. Evelyn stepped closer, her boots crunching on the brittle ground. She had heard the scream last night, slicing through the silence like a blade, carrying Lily's name within it. And now, standing at the threshold of the impossible house, she felt it again, not in her ears, but in her bones. It was a sound that twisted the marrow, leaving her skin cold and clammy. A raven flapped down from nowhere, its wings displacing the ash-like air. It landed on the gnarled iron gate, cocking its head at her. Its eyes glowed faintly, pools of unnatural light. "She's waiting," it croaked, its voice a wet rasp that made Evelyn's stomach churn in a most uncomfortable way. Then it laughed, a sound too human to belong to a bird, and as it rose up and disappeared into the house again, there appeared to be tentacles writhing on the opposite side from Evelyn. At one point, there even appeared to be an elephant's trunk that seemed to pop out of the bottom of the raven, as if the creature wasn't quite sure what it wanted to be just yet. And as she watched, the front door creaked open on its own. There was no turning back now. The air inside the house was wrong. It smelled of scorched earth and mildew, and every step Evelyn took seemed to echo infinitely, as if the walls stretched beyond the veil of time itself. The floorboards groaned beneath her feet like dying things. Shadows slithered across the walls, too quick and too deliberate to be natural. The corridors were labyrinthine, twisting upon themselves like the writhing intestines of some great beast. The walls bled, a slow, viscous ooze that dripped in rhythmic patterns. She touched it once, against her better judgment, and it burned her skin with a hiss, leaving behind a faint mark in the shape of an eye. She passed a mirror hanging crookedly on the wall. Her reflection lingered a moment too long after she moved past. When she glanced back, her reflection was smiling, a smile that hinted of malice. Then, as she watched in horror, her reflection stepped out of sight, but from inside the mirror, and began peeking out from various points in the mirror and laughing in a sick, sing-song way. She would pop her head in and out of sight, each time appearing with more and more blood covering her face, like some kind of sick, twisted peekaboo game. Evelyn threw the nearest end table through the mirror as any sane person would, shattering it into millions of pieces. And as she began to walk away, she could hear her reflections laughing from the pieces, like an evil symphony of Evelyn's. As she ventured on, the scream began again. It was everywhere and nowhere, reverberating through her skull. Evelyn clutched her ears, but it did nothing to block out the sound. It wasn't just a scream, it was grief incarnate, despair given voice, a symphony of misery that gnawed at her sanity. She turned a corner and found a room that defied explanation. Its walls spiraled upward, narrowing into an impossible black void. Furniture floated lazily through the air. An upside-down chair drifted past her head, its wooden legs twisted into claw-like shapes. A grandfather clock chimed a note so low it shook her ribs. Time inside the house, she realized, was not a linear thing. It bent and warped, much like the corridors themselves. And then she saw it, the figure at the center of the room, an old woman, or what remained of her. She was pale and translucent, her face twisted in a silent scream. Roots wrapped around her body, up and out of her mouth and back into her eyes, binding her to the air as though she were a fly caught in a spider's web. When Evelyn called out to her, the figure didn't respond. It only twisted slightly, its mouth widening as if to swallow the room whole and leave nothing but an empty void in its wake. "You can't save her," came the raven's voice, though the bird was nowhere to be seen. "But the house will take you too, if you linger." Evelyn pressed forward, determined to defy the raven's cryptic warnings. The house seemed to sense her defiance. Shifting around her, doors that had been closed now gaped open, revealing horrors that defied comprehension. One room was filled with endless rows of porcelain dolls, each one with eyes that followed her movements. Another contained a staircase spiraling downward into a chasm of writhing black tendrils. But it was the walls that disturbed her most. They seemed to move. She could hear the whispers, faint at first, like the murmur of wind through leaves, but growing louder with each step. Only they weren't words, but a cacophony of guttural sounds and wet squishes. There was a horrid smell that seemed to grow with every squelch and slosh that erupted from the walls. Something, or many somethings, were inside the walls, watching her, waiting. She caught glimpses of them in the cracks. Bulbous eyes, glistening flesh, mouths filled with needle-like teeth. Once, a hand, if it could be called that, reached through the wallpaper, its fingers too long and too many. She slashed at it with her dagger, and it recoiled with an unholy shriek. Then the raven appeared again, perched on a banister that seemed to grow from the wall like a tumor. "Do you feel it yet?" it asked, its glowing eyes narrowing, tentacles wriggling and writhing on the opposite side of it. "The house knows you. It knows what you hide. It knows what you seek." "I don't hide anything," Evelyn snapped, her voice trembling. The bird laughed, its feathers shimmering like oil. "Everyone hides something." The final room was at the top of a spiral staircase that seemed to ascend forever. By the time Evelyn reached the top, her legs ached and her lungs burned, though she couldn't tell if it was from exertion or the foul air. The door at the summit was carved with intricate designs, faces twisted in agony, their mouths open in eternal screams. Inside, the room was both vast and claustrophobic, its dimensions shifting as she moved. Lily hung at the center, her spectral form brighter now, her features sharper. But something was wrong. Her mouth stretched unnaturally wide, her eyes black voids. The raven landed on Evelyn's shoulder, its claws digging into her flesh. "Do you see now?" it whispered. "You were always meant to be here." The walls began to close in, the shadows forming faces that mocked and taunted her. Evelyn raised her dagger, unsure whether to use it on the house, the bird, or herself. But before she could act, the roots reached for her, winding around her limbs, dragging her toward Lily. She screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the room. The house itself began to laugh, a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through every fiber of her being. Lily's form dissolved, and Evelyn realized the truth. There was no saving her sister. There had never been. The house had lied, weaving her grief into its web of pain, and now it would take her as well. Her screams joined the symphony, becoming another in a chorus of madness that would scream forever. From the edge of the forest, the house watched. Its flames flickered, and its scream tore through the night, calling for the next lost soul to wander into its grasp. And so, with that final scream, our journey into the shadows comes to an end, for now, but the stories never truly stop. They linger, waiting for the right moment to find you again. If you enjoyed tonight's tale, do remember to subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with those who dare to tread the darker paths. Until next time, keep your lights low, your blankets tight, and your mind open to the mysteries of the unknown. This has been the Black Quill. Farewell for now.